Already taping. How about if I just ask you a few questions?
Okay.
First of all, what town did you grow up in?
I grew up on a farm up by Algona, Iowa, north central Iowa.
Okay. Did you go to high school there?
Went to high school and graduated in June of 1941, just before I turned 17.
So you graduated from Algona High School?
Yes.
So class of 41?
1941.
Okay. What did you do after high school? Did you, what did you do right after you were done?
Well, I just helped on the farm and helped neighbors. And of course, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in December of 1941. And everyone was covered by the draft. My brother was married at the time, and one of us would have to go for sure. So as soon as I turned 18, I enlisted. And then for that 1 year, I turned 18 June 1942. So for that year, I just helped my dad on the farm and other neighbors.
Okay. I'm going to put this, why don't you just use this like under your hands there, and that maybe the light will, yeah, okay.
Better?
That helps. Yeah, get rid of a shadow that way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it was 1942 before you entered the service.
Yeah.
Were you drafted or did you sign up?
No, I enlisted in October of 1942.
In what branch?
In the Army Air Corps.
Okay.
I grew up fascinated by airplanes, and I wanted to fly. So, and all these posters they had on the windows downtown, the P-38s and so on, I enlisted because I wanted to fly a P-38.
Oh, that's a fighter plane, right?
Fighter, twin-engine fighter.
Okay. Had you ever done any flying before you went in the service?
Never.
Okay.
No.
So where did they send you for basic?
Okay, I went to Jefferson Barracks. I was called up, had to go to Omaha, and got on a train and ended up at Jefferson Barracks for boot camp. And I didn't have any college. Prior to that time, they required 2 years of college to get in the Army Air Corps. But they needed crew so bad, all you had to do was pass a test, a certain grade on a test, and then they took you. And they established what they call a college training detachment. So they sent you to a college for kind of refreshers. And I went to Creighton University in Omaha for 4 months. We had weather classes, physics classes, geography, PE, and things like that, math, because there's a lot of physics and figuring weight and balance and whatever.
Was this regular college classes, or was it
Yes.
Special military?
No, it was regular college
Okay.
classes, and we were all billeted right in the dormitories, and we had to go to class every day, and PE. Of course, we always had military marching and so on. But from there, I went back to Jefferson Barracks, and then they sent me out to Santa Ana, California on a troop train for pre-flight. And there about 2 months, I guess. We had more classes in physics, code, Morse code, aircraft recognition, ship recognition. They you were pretty much on the honor system out there. On the aircraft recognition, they would show a silhouette on the screen of different airplanes. They'd start out maybe slow and tell you what to look for. And then they keep speeding this up, and by the time you got through the class, you had to recognize them at about hundredth of a second, just a flash.
Is this like American aircraft?
Yeah,
or
American
aircraft?
American aircraft, German, Japanese, Italian. Same way with the ships, because you had to recognize things at an instant. And when they put the test on, instructor would walk out and You didn't dare take your eyes off your paper. If you ever caught cheating, you were out. Just no questions asked. You were dumped out of the program. So everyone was pretty cautious, and most everyone got through. There were a few washed out, but it was pretty rigorous. We had to be up at 5 and in the sack at 10, and all through the day we'd have classes, and we'd march in formation. Plus we'd handle KP and all that other stuff.
And what part of California was this in?
This was Santa Ana, California. It's south of Los Angeles, about an hour's drive.
And you went there from Jefferson Barracks, and that's in St. Louis, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So
Jefferson Barracks was in St. Louis, and that was just a boot camp to get lined up to go somewhere. Went out there in July, and then I got through that. I went to primary flight school at Visalia early September. I was out there about 2 months. And in primary, we flew the Ryan PT-22 low wing, open cockpit. And we were in different flights there also, and we also had class there too on weight and balance and how to lift is created by wings, how the airfoils work and so on. And then we flew every day with an instructor. Each instructor had about 6 students. And you were given about 8-9 hours to solo. And I soloed about 8. And we'd go up and practice stalls, slow rolls, snap rolls, loops and spins. Those days we all did spins. They don't do that anymore. But about halfway through, our flight started to shrink, and only about half of them got through primary. Those that washed out were sent on to gunnery school primarily, and made
to be gunners on bombers.
Gunners on bombers, yeah. We had to have a flight check halfway through, and then a final flight check. And on the final flight check, well, on any flight check, another instructor would take you up. And before you'd go up, he'd tell you exactly what he'd want you to do, like climb up to 3,000, do a steep right turn, and then maybe a snap roll to the right, and then maybe a slow roll to the left, and emblem or a loop, and end up with climbing turns and so on, and end up with always a spin. And I remember my final flight check, the instructor told me to make a 2.5 turn spin to the left, climb up to 35 and then spin down. Well, you always make a steep 90-degree turn one way and then a 90-degree the other way to clear yourself. And I know he was looking too. So I put it in a spin, and about first loop around I saw a yellow flash right out. I don't know how he missed it. Another airplane. Oh. Scared the instructor to death. He grabbed it and went back to the base and climbed out, walked away, and never said a word. And I thought, sure, I'm washed out now.
But you weren't.
No, but I don't know how we missed it. It was so close.
Wow.
I can still see that flat. They had yellow fabric wings.
So that was his fault, wasn't it?
Well, no, it was my fault. I didn't see it anywhere, and I know he didn't either. But it's just one of those things that happen. Mm-hmm. So I had to wait over the weekend and take another flight check with the military lieutenant, and got through that one fine. So I went on to basic. Went on to basic up at Chico, California. That's up in the northern end of California, and there we flew BT-13. We had the Ryan primary train was about 155 horse engine. There we had a 450 horsepower engine. We had flaps. It's still a standard non-retractable gear, but we also had prop pitch, and so just a little more advanced. And there we learned, we did snap rolls, slow rolls, spins, everything we did before, except we also started flying formation and night flying. Mm. And I remember my first flight check on that one. Climbed in, and well, one of my buddy students came down, and he was shaking his head, looked pretty worried, and I thought, man, maybe this is not going to be so good. I climbed in, all the instruments were covered over. The airspeed was covered over, pasted over. So I thought, well, that's the way it's supposed to be. So I took off and went through all the maneuvers and got down, and the next guy got in there and he complained about it. Why can't I see these instruments? And the instructor didn't even know this pasted over. They were
Oh, it wasn't intentional?
No. So you learn to do things by sound a lot, okay. and the attitude of the airplane. So I went through all my turns and everything and so on by the sound of the engine.
That wasn't part of the test. They weren't doing
But
that
I got
on
through. No. For some reason, someone was always watching the airspeed, so the instructor covered it over to make him look at somewhere else. But anyway, I got through that just fine. But about halfway through, this was in December, it got so foggy up there that we couldn't fly every day, so they took half of us down to Victorville, and that's on the Mojave Desert, Southern California. And so half of us flew down there to finish the last half of our basic. And it was cold down there. You get up and we'd fly, we'd have to fly at night and also fly formation at night. And of course there were buttes sticking up around, you had to remember where they were. But got through basic, I had a good instructor. And from then on you either go to single engine or twin engine.
And you wanted to
advance.
go to
I wanted to go to twin engine.
Oh, you did?
So they accommodated me and sent me to twin engine. And that was at Stockton, California.
Now, single engine would be fighters, right?
Yes.
So you'd given up on flying the P-38?
Well, the P-38 was a twin engine fighter.
Okay. Okay, so you're still thinking of fighter.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I flew one of the BT-13s from Victorville back up to Chico. And then they took us down the train at Stockton. And there we flew the AT-17 twin engine. Of course, that ended snap rolls and slow rolls, because you didn't do acrobatics for those. But we did a lot of night flying and formation flying with those, and also cross countries. Mm. Cross countries daytime, cross countries nighttime, and got through that in fine shape. And then once you're through, they assign you where they need you. And they asked you whether you wanted to go Pacific Theater or the European. Well, I wanted to go to the European Theater, and fortunately I got what I wanted. So I got assigned to co-pilot school. They needed co-pilots, and you either go to pilot transition or you go to co-pilot school. And I was sent to Indian Springs, Nevada to co-pilot school. I was there about a month or 5 weeks, 6 weeks. And probably was fortunate that I did, because all of our pilots were returned from Europe, from the finished their tours, and they knew a lot about the B-17 that I learned. And every time I went out to fly with them, I had to go through some questions, and they'd asked me about the airplane, the different systems, and we had classes on the different systems, and even worked on the engines, changing the oil QNOs and so on. So I knew the systems of the B-17 really well, better than the pilots did, because they never got that training. And out there at Indian Springs, of course, it was a gunnery school also, and we'd take the gunners up to fire at these sleeve targets. The women in the Air Force would fly these AT-6s pulling sleeves behind them.
Women pilots?
Yeah, almost entirely they were women pilots. Then the gunners would fire the 50 caliber machine guns at this sleeve target that they were towing. They all had different color paint on the tip of their bullets, so they could tell which one hit. And then after they're through there, we'd take them down on a range on the ground, just fly above the ground, and they'd fire at a target on the ground. And of course the gunnery instructor had put some rounds in to jam up the gun, and of course that was the goal, to get them to learn how to fix their guns so they'd fire if they jammed up in combat. So it was a good experience for me, and I was glad I got to go there. When we was all through, one or two of the pilots were kind of crazy, and they'd take off and fly around the desert over horse corrals and chase the horses out over the fence. Then he'd go down the highway between down the valleys, and he thought it was great fun to put his wheels down and then come in right over the highway like he was going to land on the highway. All the cars would slow up, and then one time I remember there was a bus coming up, and he thought, oh, this would be fun, so he got down and he had the wheels down, coming down. You could see the bus slowing up, and pretty soon his clothes all of a sudden he put his brakes on and got off right in the shoulder, and all the people started pouring out, and then he zoomed right over him climbing out. But
you get in trouble for that?
If you were caught, you were probably out. That would probably be the end of the flying. So I never took any chances, and I didn't really like to be along with him, because that might have affected me too. But,
yeah.
But there were pilots that took a lot of chances they shouldn't have. And but anyway, finished the classes at Indian Springs, Nevada. Then they sent me to Lincoln, Nebraska, and that was a replacement where you gather all the crews together, or gather all the flyers together, and you put them together in crews. So that's where my crew was formed, and I got pilot Virgil Benson originally from Minnesota. And he was a good pilot, and we got along great. And
this is for a B-17 crew.
yeah.
At what point did you realize you weren't going to fly a P-38 and you were going to be?
Well, when I went to co-pilot school, 4-engine.
Yeah.
When I went to 4-engine,
you knew then.
and actually, after I got to flying that B-17 with these pilots, it was a good, stable airplane.
You weren't that disappointed?
No, that was a good airplane. So we were all shipped down by train to Alexandria, Louisiana for overseas training. And down there we flew formation on mock missions. Would take off, and they would fly to one city, then another, like Galveston to I can't remember them now. It won't come to me. In Mississippi, we'll go from Alexander to some cities in Louisiana to Texas to Mississippi and back, Biloxi, Mississippi, and Gulfport, a few of those. And they would give the bombardiers practice with their bomb sight. And they'd take a camera shot when they leave so they could tell. And then all the rest of them were flying formation. Gave us good practice of how they wanted the formation to be flown.
They wouldn't actually drop anything, no. They would just decide when they were going to.
And we'd go out on our own, our crew, and the bombardier would have 50-pound, I guess they're about 250-pound practice bombs. They were mostly sand with a charge in the tip. And he'd drop those, and that charge would explode to see how close he could get to it.
It's like a target marked on the ground?
Oh yeah, big round target. And so we did a lot of that. And they also had there were a machine that rolled around on wheels, probably 12 feet high, kind of with a Norden bomb sight on it. And you could actually come forth on a target and learn how to, and I operated one of those too, so I know how they worked. And while I was flying around, we flew around just to get acquainted with the crew. And I got down in all the positions so I knew where they were, how they were. And I flew down in the ball turret, got down in there so I knew how the ball turret gunner felt.
You're a little tall to go in the ball turret,
and it was cramped. You sit in there with your knees up around your chin, and
they usually put a short guy in there, don't they?
Usually, yeah. I got back in the tail, and I tell you, I knew what the rest of the crew had to go through because I've been there. And I think that was important too, because I had little empathy for them. And when we got up in combat in the 8-9 hours sitting down there without being able to move.
Mm-hmm.
But we finished our overseas training, and our crew became pretty close. And then they shipped us by train out to Langley Field, Virginia. And we were out there for about a month getting ready to go fly overseas. They gave us a new airplane with what they called a Mickey ship. It had a radar unit in one half of the radio room. And so we flew that over. We took off from Langley Field, flew out over the ocean up the coast to Bangor, Maine. And there we got staged to, we got some secret orders that we couldn't open until we were in the air. And we flew from Bangor, Maine to Goose Bay, Labrador. And on the way we could open our orders. So we found we were going to Wales, or I mean England. And got up to Labrador, and it was snowing. We were pretty lucky to have a break in the weather to find the field. But this was in October. So the weather had started getting kind of bad that far north. We were there just probably one night, and they briefed us for the flight from Labrador to Iceland. And we go over the tip of Greenland. And it was about a 9-hour flight. And so we had to check in at Greenland on our gas consumption and what we had left. And if we were short, they'd call us in to Greenland. And they showed us a movie or video of how to get, we'd have to let down over the ocean and go up a little fjord and get the right, you had a V and you'd have to take the right Y, and then go up there. You had certain landmarks you're supposed to spot, and then this one landing strip started at the edge of the water and went uphill. had one chance at it. If you missed it, it wasn't hardly wide enough to turn around for a second chance. If you turned around, you'd have to go clear on out again and then come back up. So we leaned out our engines, and we were pretty careful to conserve our fuel, and we didn't land. We went right on to Iceland. We took off in the dark, of course, at that time. When it got light, we were over the water, icebergs floating around in the water. And we flew right over, we about 14,000 feet, flew right over the southern tip of Greenland, probably a couple thousand feet above the mountains. And it was dark when we got to Iceland again. And we were there probably one night, and then we flew from Iceland to Valley Airfield in Wales. Went down right over Ireland and landed at Wales. There they took the ship away, airplane away from us, and I don't know where they flew it to. But we went by train to Great Ashfield up in East Anglia.
Now, you had a crew of 9?
We had
right?
a crew of 10 at that time.
10?
Mm-hmm.
And were you pilot or co-pilot?
I was co-pilot then. Okay. So we, Great Ashfield was by a little town of Elmswell. It was actually about 8 miles east of Bury St. Edmunds, up north of London, about halfway up to the North Sea. We were about 40 miles inland, 30 to 40 miles from the North Sea. And there we got assigned to, they had 4 squadrons on this air base, and we got assigned to the 548 Squadron. There's a 385th Bomb Group. Every base had a group, was a group. And my first mission was to Merseburg, an oil refinery in Germany. They they always, on the first mission, they put the co-pilot with an older crew, and then they put an older pilot with the crew that I was on. And so I flew with an older crew, and my crew had another co-pilot who had flown some missions. Well, we always, on our missions, we'd climb up probably 14,000 feet to get in formation. We'd put up 4 squadrons of 12 bombers each. So we had 36 bombers in a group. All of our missions were over Germany at that time. We'd bomb oil fields, marshalling yards, rail yards, airfields, shipbuilding factories, submarine pens, and in the end we'd have Berlin, cities like Berlin. And up to that, toward the end of the war, we'd try to hit just the military targets, particularly the oil production, oil fields and oil refineries, and airfields. And eventually,
in Germany too, or
that was all in Germany.
Okay.
The thing that helped in the war, we limited their oil production. They were so short of fuel that I understood they pushed their fighters to the end of the runway because they were short of fuel. And we also bombed the ball bearing plants. And but our missions were anywhere from 8 to 9.5 hours long. And we'd, the first mission we had, we were on, well, to get in formation, we'd fly formation. Every group had their own color flares. We'd shoot these very pistol flares out the top of the airplane, one after another, from the lead ship. And
in flight?
In flight.
Okay.
And then we'd take off and take up a heading. If the weather was bad, we'd always form over a buncher or what is a radio station, a beacon. We'd home in on that. And you'd climb all the way to about 12, 14,000, and you could see the lead plane shooting his flares off, and then you'd get into where you're supposed to be. And but our mission started, I'm probably getting back and forth here, but our mission started early in the morning. Our division line would be up to 2 hours long, one group after another, 2 minutes apart. And
taking off every 2 minutes.
Well, when we'd take off, we'd be all lined up on the perimeter, and we'd pull in just as soon as he's halfway down, or till we can't. We'd usually have fog in the morning in the winter, and if you could see the edge of the runway, you'd take off. We'd give him a certain length of time, know he's down there and about to go off, then we'd take off, climb up.
Even though you couldn't see him?
Oh yeah, then we'd had 6,000-foot runway, and of course those days we never had the power. We had 4 1,200 horsepower engines, and we'd make it above the fence in the runway. So we would climb out above the clouds, and that's where we'd form. But before we got that far, they would put up a list of crews that were going to fly the next morning about 11 o'clock. So we'd always be waiting up, and didn't know where he was going. All these crews are going to fly, so anywhere from 4 to 5:30 they'd call you, depending on where in the division line in your takeoff time. 4 o'clock in the morning, they may come around and shake you out of your bunk, and you go get shaved and dressed. We'd wear long underwear, heavy underwear, and our wool uniform, necktie and the whole works. And then we'd have a heavy alpaca jacket, and then we'd head for the mess hall. And usually if you're on a mission, somehow they scrounged up some fresh eggs, and you might have a fried egg and some sour grapefruit juice and toast, and that was about it. But you didn't spend much time there because you headed for the briefing room. And then we'd all sit there. The pilots would go to one briefing, the navigators to another area, bombardiers to another. And the gunners would be out getting their 50 caliber machine guns out and installed in the airplane. So we'd sit there, and when the CO would come in, and they have a curtain over the map, and they'd pull the map back, and there they'd have the target and the route we was going, the route we was coming back.
Now, why did they keep that covered until then?
Because they didn't want anybody to know where he was going. And
for security.
Security. So we all carried a notebook, and then they said, well, we're going to take off a certain time, we're going to form at a certain altitude over a certain beacon, and we're going to do this and that, and then you had to put down where you were going to fly in the formation, whether it be the right or left wing into the low section, or the off the lead plane, or what.
So how many planes would go on these missions together?
Every airfield would put up 36, 3 squadrons of 12. We had 4 squadrons, one would stand down each mission. And these airfields were probably 8 or 10 miles apart. Every airfield was putting up the same. So there's a lot of airplanes. We'd have up to 1,800 bombers on one mission.
Really?
At times. Mm-hmm.
That pretty much filled the sky, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I would. I'll cover that a little bit later, but then we get through what the mission was going to be. They'd tell us what they expected as far as flak or anti-aircraft fire, and whether we could expect fighters or not. Toward the end of the war, we never had as many fighters as problems as we did the first year and a half over there. And then once we were through the briefing, we'd head out to the hangar area. It wasn't a hangar, but all the airplanes were out, but the building where we kept all our flight suits had a locker there. Would have our coveralls, flight suit in fact, we'd go draw a heated suit and a parachute. Then we'd go get dressed over our wool uniform. We'd put a heated suit over. Sometimes they had a different kind, but the newer kind was kind of a satin, kind of forerunner of an electric blanket. You'd put trousers on, and then a jacket, and the trouser would hook into the jacket, and then you'd have felt slippers that you'd put on, leave your shoes off, and they'd snap into the pant leg. Then we had gloves that'd snap into the sleeve. Then you'd wear these big flying sheep-line boots. And but over that we would put our flying coveralls, and then we'd have a wool sweater on, and then we'd have a heavy jacket, and then we'd have a Mae West.
Life jacket?
Mae West because we flew over the sea.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'd have a parachute harness. And of course we'd have our helmet and our oxygen mask. We always kept with us our own personal oxygen mask.
How much did all that weigh, do you know?
Quite a bit. You were lumbering around.
Yeah.
It looked like a football player when you get all that stuff on.
And you said heated suits, they're electric? They're
electric, and then this jacket had a place you'd pull that out of the pocket hole, and you could plug that inside of the airplane.
Plug yourself into the plane?
Yeah, and you could turn a rheostat up to make it warmer.
But you couldn't move around when that was plugged in?
Well, no, you couldn't move anyway, because when you sit in that seat, you're there for the mission. Well, you could get up, but you had enough to do to keep you there. And the gunners, after takeoff, we would get up, and then after we're up and getting in formation, the ball turret gunner would get down in his turret once we're off the ground. Tail gunner would get back in the tail. And of course we only flew 9. We had a top turret gunner when we went over, but we had an engineer. We had 2 pilots, navigator, bombardier. And then we had an engineer who, once we got off the ground, had nothing to do, so he became the top turret gunner. And so the old top turret gunner, that's all he could do, was taken off, and they made radio operators out of him, and had him an extra man in the radio room, and he'd have a bank of radios that he'd tune in different German stations and then put out a steady tone on it to jam it up if he could.
German military radio?
Yeah, any beacon he could find coming up, he'd jam it. And also he carried chaff, was probably like icicles you'd put on Christmas tree in little bundles, and he would chuck those out when we get flak, and each they'd come apart, and all these things would flutter down, and every one of them would turn a signal, just like the airplane would. So
that was to confuse radar?
Yes, to kind of confuse the radar. But the German anti-aircraft gunners were good, and that 88 cannon was probably one of the best ones ever built at that time. But We would also have a big bag, we'd have flak suits in it. And then once we were to be ready for takeoff at a certain time, so we'd pre-fight the airplane, everything would get set. Crew chief would have them run up, topped off with gasoline. And then when it came time, we'd start up, taxi out to the perimeter, and we'd take off in one after another. Well, once we got up to altitude and get in formation, then all we did was fly formation from then on. And each group flew around until they got in their spot they're supposed to be in the division line. We would leave the coast of England, a certain point on the coast. Every group had a certain time to leave that point. And every group was supposed to leave about 2 minutes apart from that point. And that then formed our division line. We'd climb all the way to the target. An airplane back home was always top shape. Those airplanes over there always had something wrong with them because you had to fly them. It was nothing major. If it was just something minor, it was overwritten and you go ahead and fly. We'd always have a spare. If something went wrong, you could go back and get one. We had to do that once or twice. And we'd get that and catch up with formation before they left the coast. But the first 9 missions, I flew a different airplane every time. The new crews got the old war worries, and the old crews kind of got the better airplanes because they needed to have some assurance they were going to finish. A tour, when I first got over there, was 25 missions. And a little later, they were short of crews, so they raised it to 30 and eventually 35. So I was stuck flying 35 missions. But on our airplane, the lead airplane always flew 150 miles an hour, and he was climbing all the time. Our group CO wanted every airplane right up in formation. Some of these old planes, you couldn't keep it up there hardly, and you weren't supposed to fly B-17 over 2,300 RPM and climbing more than an hour. We flew some of them wide open for an hour just to keep up. And that's the way you did whatever you had to do in combat. And the only thing you watched is cylinder head temperature, and keep the cowl flaps closed to reduce drag. If they got too hot, you'd open a little ways. But we'd run them pretty hard, and the CO wanted formation tight because fighters could go through a loose formation, and he wanted the planes, the wingman, to fly right up with his wing, even with the waist window of the plane he's flying off of, and just far enough out so your wing tip would miss the other one. And it's actually easier to fly that way because it's small corrections. And the low section lead is supposed to fly right up under the tail of the lead plane, and the low element lead under that one, and a high element lead up above. So that was the way we stacked our 12 airplanes in a squadron. And the CO put a co-pilot in the tail gunner position of the lead airplane to keep an eye on you. If you were lagging back and not keeping up where you should, you got reported. So it was on our first mission to Merseburg. We're flying along, and of course I didn't know what to expect. I was on a mission, and I was learning with this whole crew, and he had probably 30 missions, and he was pretty gray. And all of a sudden, I see 4 bursts right outside my window, not 20 feet over, right on our level. And I knew right away what it was. Nobody had to tell me that was anti-aircraft flak. And then you see a red flash and then a puff of smoke. And right away you feel that pieces of that shell hit the airplane. And pretty soon there were bursts all over, always in a battery of 4 bursts at a time. And if the first 4 might be a little high or low, you can count on the next one being right on your level. I don't know how they did it, but they were pretty accurate.
These are the 88s?
These 88 millimeter. Once in a while you'd see 105 millimeter and very occasionally 155 millimeter. You could tell by the size of burst. Mostly 88s.
What'd the burst look like?
They were just a flash, fire. Then they were just a puff of smoke, black smoke. And then they'd gradually, right at first they're real dark black, and after they're gone a while they're fade and get a little bigger.
Did you hear them also?
No. Contrary to movies, you don't hear that.
Okay.
You got so much roar of your engines, you don't hear nothing. You can't hardly talk to each other. We talked over the intercom. Those engines are running wide open. They're just roaring, and they're noisy. There's no insulation, no heat, and no pressurized cabins. So you don't hear that. Those burst right outside. All you do is see it. And then you hear the flak pieces hit like a handful of gravel hitting the side of the plane. Merceburg was pretty heavily fortified with anti-aircraft. And it was a long mission, and we got back. We were running short of fuel. I was checking our fuel all the time. And at that time we had taken Brussels. We had an air base at Brussels. This was along in early November, and the invasion was June 6th. So we had already taken part of Belgium. We didn't have enough fuel to get back across the channel, so a good share of the airplanes landed at Brussels. And I was transferring fuel from one to another to try to keep enough fuel in the tanks to keep them running. And we got on and downwind and come around, and we didn't know if we were going to make it or not. And coming in on a final approach, all of a sudden another B-17 comes shooting in underneath us, got out in front, and we dropped down in his prop wash, and it just turned the airplane right up almost like that, and I was looking straight down to the ground. And of course the pilot put on the power right away, and first thing you do is the co-pilot flips up the wheels, and I started milking up the flaps. Seemed like we just hung there for a minute, and then all of a sudden we slid out, and we was, in fact, I took my hands off the flaps for a minute because I thought it was going right in the ground, and then when we slid out I started getting the flaps up. And we went down between 2 rows of airplanes just above the ground. All the fellows were running to get out of our way, and we climbed out, came around for another landing, and made it okay. But that probably the first narrow escape. And I noticed on the climb out, the pilot reached up to see if it picked the wheels up. I'd already had it done, and he told my pilot later, he says, "You got a good co-pilot, you better keep him," because he had everything done just like you're supposed to. But that was part of the co-pilot training I think I had. That was, and so we were there overnight and flew back to England the next day. Well, I was with my own crew a couple of days later, next mission to Merseburg, first 2. And from then on, it was maybe we flew every third or fourth day, depending on the weather. And then all of a sudden, the weather got kind of bad, and of course, the Battle of the Bulge was December 16th. And the weather was so bad, we couldn't get off. And I think I was on a short mission, not Christmas Eve. And next one was January 2nd. And
you flew a mission on Christmas Eve?
Yeah, didn't matter, Christmas Day or whatever. Well, it was Christmas Eve day before Christmas. The next mission I was on was January 2nd, 1945, and we were to hit a tank depot behind the front line a ways, and we had anti-personnel bombs, fragment bombs. One slung over the other, probably as many as they could get into Bombay.
Okay, we're on the last tape. We were talking about
we were
mission, I believe.
We're on our 9th mission, January 2nd, 1945, and we were on our way to bomb a tank depot behind the front lines. The Germans had a bunch of Tiger tanks amassed back there.
This was in Germany?
In Germany. Well, I'm not sure if it was in France or Germany. It was around a little village of Nybach, and I've never been able to find that on a map, but it could have been right inside France or Belgium. Okay. And we were climbing. We were to bomb at 24,000 feet at that time. We normally bombed at 24, 26, 28,000 feet. And about 22,000 feet, we were flying off of the right wing of the low section lead. And the top turret gunner got down out of his turret, and of course, when you're flying off the right wing, you're always looking to the left. And he tapped me on the shoulder, and he pointed out to the wing of the other pilot was flying. So I looked out there, and here was a stream of oil coming out of the top of the cowling. The top of the cowling about the size of my little finger. And it would come up and blow right back on top of the wing, and top of the wing had a whole bunch of oil frozen on top, probably a foot thick. He just happened to notice it when he swung around with his turret. So I looked at the oil pressure gauge, and we still had oil pressure. And about that time, it started flickering, so I hit the feathering button to feather the prop, so you turn it into the wind to stop the drag. Otherwise, it's just a windmill.
So you stopped that engine?
But nothing happened. It started, but it apparently flak or something had broken the oil line. Our prop pitch was changed by engine oil pressure. That dome out in front of the prop was a little cylinder, and you'd pump oil out in that cylinder to change the pitch of the prop. Well, the engine was out of oil, and so it did not. You had to use oil pressure to put it into feathering position. So since it didn't go, it went back in the low pitch as far as it could, and it stood there windmilling. And wasn't long without oil, it would start to come apart. Well, we just put the power on the other engines, and about that time, we lost the amplifier to the supercharger on the right outboard engine. This was an inboard right engine. And so we always carried a spare amplifier, which were in the radio room. So we called back to the radio operator to change the amplifier so we could get our power on that number 4 engine. Well, at that time, they carried those spares down in the camera well. And he said he couldn't get it out. He kicked at it and it was stuck in there, couldn't get it loose. All he had to do was take one out and slip the other one in. So we lost the power on that engine. And so we started losing altitude and the formation left us. And so the navigator gave us a heading to turn back. And we still had full bomb load. We had 3,800 gallons of gasoline to start with, and we were probably 3 hours into mission. We had a lot of fuel left, and losing altitude all the time, and this engine, number 3 engine, got to vibrating so badly that we were both holding the left rudder to keep the airplane straight, because we had the other 2 engines going full power. And it was vibrating so bad we could hardly hold it in control anymore. And we got down to about 12,000 feet, and the weather was supposed to be socked into the ground, and we thought we better not go down through it and try a crash landing. We may not be able to see the ground, and probably wouldn't survive if we did, because we had all those bombs on board and didn't know where we were, so we didn't want to drop them maybe on our own forces. So we decided to bail out the crew just above the clouds. And so we called all the crew and told them to bail out. And then the other pilot and I put the B-17 on autopilot. We always had that set up. When we took off, we'd set it up and have it kind of all the knobs, ailerons, everything set so it'd fly straight and level, and then we'd just flip the one lever off. All we had to do is flip it back on to put it in. So we flipped the autopilot on, and then we always carried our chest pack parachute under the seat. So I pulled that out under the seat, snapped it on, and I crawled out, and we had to go back between the seats and then down through an opening right in front of the top turret into the catwalk below. Then the escape hatch was right ahead, just behind the number 2 engine prop. And I squeezed back through there, and I got hung up. My parachute harness got hooked on something on the top turret, so I had to climb back up again and get that loose. Well, then I got back down, and the other pilot was clambering on top of me. And so I sat there. The navigator and the bombardier had already gone out. The escape hatch door had already been jettisoned. So I just sat there in the catwalk, my feet dangling out, and we always carried a pair of escape shoes, because we was supposed to get rid of our uniform if we went down, and of course you wouldn't have any shoes. And so we had a pair of high-top English shoes, and I always carried them with the shoestrings tied together, just looped them over my arm. And so I just sat there. I see the pilot coming down behind me, so I just said, God, I put myself in your hands, and I was ready for whatever was going to happen, and I rolled out. And the slipstream caught me and turned me face up, and I saw the tail of the B-17 flash by. Then I was tumbling in the clouds. And you fall pretty fast. In fact, air just about tears your clothes off. I didn't pull my chute right away because I was tumbling, and I had the thought I didn't want to wind the shroud lines up so they wouldn't open. So these shoes were flapping around and hitting me in the face, so I took them and I just slung them away from me. And when I got my arms out, I quit spinning. And I was going head down, head first. and I saw a little break in the clouds, saw the ground, so I pulled the chute, I pulled the ripcord, and that little pilot chute popped out, and I saw a little white stream come out, and all of a sudden it opened, and it flopped me up, and the shoulder harness ripped loose. I could hear them just go ripping, and all of a sudden it hit me right across, right in the nose, and it drains the blood from your head, and you kind of black out momentarily. When I came to, I looked up, and that canopy was just bobbing around above me, and quiet. I've never had such a quiet moment. It seemed rather peaceful from getting away from that roar of those engines. And I was just watching that chute bob around, and all of a sudden I heard an airplane engine. And it was getting louder, and I thought, well, it was a German fighter. And it faded away, and I thought, I looked around, I couldn't see him anywhere, and I thought, well, maybe he went on by me, didn't see me, and all of a sudden it started getting louder again. And I thought, well, he spotted me, now he's coming back to finish me off, and I couldn't see an airplane anywhere. So I thought, well, I kind of expected machine gun bullets to come from somewhere. And it started to fade away. And right away, it started getting louder, and got louder and louder, and all of a sudden, the B-17 come out of the clouds right above me, a little bit to the right and above, and is diving in a turn right toward me. And I thought it was going to come right through me, or snag my chute. And right about 100 yards out in front of me, it flipped up in the right wing and dove in the ground right below and in front of me. I saw it dive in the ground, explode, nothing but a big ball of fire, and then when the fire and smoke cleared, there was absolutely nothing. You couldn't see a thing.
Disintegrated the plane.
Yeah. It blew completely apart, and whatever was left went into the ground. But that B-17 should have stayed on autopilot and flew straight level until the gas ran out. But we probably got out when we should have, because the autopilot couldn't hold it either. And when it broke away from the autopilot's got a gyro, and when it tumbles, that gyro will tell the controls to go one way or the other, and it was diving, and then it'd come up, and then it'd come back into a spin and dive again. And that's what I was hearing. When it get loud, it was diving, then it'd come up and kind of fade away. But the third time, it was coming right straight out of the clouds, just almost straight down and turning into me.
How close did it get to you?
It was about 200 yards out in front of me. I thought sure it was coming right through me, but just before I got there, it flopped, the gyro flopped over and turned it up the other way, and then went down, and it kind of grazed through a bunch of trees and blew up right into the ground. And all I could do is pray that the rest of the crew got out, because there was nothing left. Couldn't get my eyes off of it. There was just one little thin column of smoke coming up, black smoke. And very soon I wasn't looking down like this, I was looking out here. And so I see the horizon was coming up. Then I looked down, and a fence came under me. I was probably 16, 18 feet over the fence. And so I started looking over my left shoulder to see where I was going to light. About that time I hit, come down on my left hip, and I can still feel my head coming down, and bit through my tongue, and I was knocked clean out. When I came to, I was laying down, face down, on my arm under my head, and I was spitting a little snow or blood in the snow, and kind of foggy, and all of a sudden I felt my hip hurting. So I kind of rolled up off it a little bit, and that's when I saw two fellas standing beside me, and I looked up, and there, one guy had a pitchfork held right over the top of me. So I didn't move, and I didn't know what was going on anyway. I kind of had some amnesia, and he didn't move a bit. He just held the fork there. He didn't know who he was, and later I found out he thought I was German, and he didn't know whether I had a weapon or not. We were issued 45 pistols, but I never carried it because you couldn't use them to shoot your way out anyways. They then I looked down the little slope, and here was a whole bunch of people running up, men, women, and children, and probably 12, 15, 16 people. And pretty soon they was up all around me, just jabbering like everything, and I couldn't understand a thing, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. Why am I here? And then I see these shroud lines out. I looked up, they were still standing with a pitchfork over me. So I started pulling in the shroud lines so I could unhook the chute, and then they all were standing away from me. Then they all kind of come in and started gathering the thing up and unhooked me, and the two men helped me up on my good right leg. And I looked around, and gee, I couldn't figure out what was going on. Then I see that beyond a little grove of trees, that little column of smoke over there. And then I remembered exactly what happened, and I thought they were German. They handed me a big water glass full of amber-colored stuff, and I thought, well, they're going to poison me, so I wouldn't drink it. I handed it back, and they were trying to tell me something, and finally they started pointing down toward a little dirt road, and there a black car with a white star had driven up, and they motioned, they wanted me to go down there. So they wanted to carry me down, and I said no, and I grabbed my arm around the neck of a couple of the men and kind of hobbled down there. It turned out to be two French military policemen, and they spoke English. So they want to know what happened, so I told them kind of what happened. Well, they rattled it off to the other people. Then they knew, and they become jubilant, and boy, you could tell how happy they were.
Did you know what nationality they were by then?
Well, they told me they're French people. These two military policemen said I'd come down just 20 miles our side the front line, which was the Battle of the Bulge Line at that time.
If you'd been 20 miles farther, you would have been a prisoner of war.
That's right. I could have, just a few seconds the other way, I could have been on the other side. And then they handed me this glass back, and well, they gave it to the policeman, and he gave it to me, so I thought it was okay. So I took a big gulp, about half the glass in one gulp, and I couldn't see, I couldn't breathe. It was like gasoline. I couldn't draw a breath in, and I don't even know who took the glass from me, because I never drank much in the service anyway.
What was it?
Well, I thought it was cognac all the time. When I was over there 2 years ago, they said, they laughed at me, and they said, nah, that wasn't cognac, that was home brew, 99 proof. Yeah, I think they made it out of potatoes or something. Anyway, the two military police said there's a military hospital in St. Quentin, about 2 miles away. The school that the Army had taken over for a hospital, we'll take you there. I says, fine. So that's how I knew I was about 2 miles outside of St. Quentin. So they put the parachute in there, and they wanted to make a pillow, wanted me to lay down in the back seat. And I wasn't about to lay down anywhere. So I kind of sat on the edge of the seat, and they got in the front and started off. I says, can you get up there where the bomber blew up? So I'd like to see if there's anything left. Well, they started up a cut and got hung up on some frozen ruts. And one driver had to take a tire wrench and get out and chop away underneath to get loose. And I tried to stumble up a embankment where I could see, and I couldn't make it up, so I just got back. I said, he was loose then. I said, forget it, just take me to the hospital. So they took me in there. They took me inside and x-rayed me, and there wasn't any broken bones, thank heavens. And just a bad bruise. My leg turned black from my hip clear to my knee. And I was there probably 2.5 weeks till I could walk again. And after I could get up, get around a little, I spent my time making bandages, folding bandages for them and making Q-tips. And then when I was okay, also my tail gunner came in. He had hurt his ankle, couldn't walk. And so they turned us both loose. They put us on orders. Well, they took us in an ambulance up to Charleroi, a little farther north, and we had to get checked out by a military doctor. And he okayed me to go, but they x-rayed the tail gunner and he had a broken ankle. So they put him back in the hospital. It's the last time I saw him. And so they put me on orders, and I got the orders yet. It says, in His Majesty's service, find my way back to England. So I could go anywhere I wanted to. So they took me out to infantry replacement depot. The supply sergeant took me in and got me a stocking cap and musette bag, some towel, shaving kit, whatnot, and he wanted to give me the whole supply store, and I said, I've got to carry this stuff. I got all I want. And so I was there about 2 days. I was sleeping in a back porch in a sack of straw, freezing to death. And finally, of course, I had to have a meeting with the CO. And the CO wanted to give me his cap and everything. I said, no, I'm fixed up fine. But I says, is there an air base around here somewhere where I can maybe find a flight back some way? Oh, we got a fighter base about 20 miles out. Well, will you take me there? Sure. So the next day they took me out on a truck. But the interesting thing, the supply sergeant told me that, remember this Battle of the Bulge, and they were bringing them in pretty fast. And he said these troops were so poorly trained right at the end of the war, they had to take them out on the firing range to teach them how to fire the rifle. And
American troops?
Yeah. And the same thing happened to air crews right the last month or so. I'll go over that later. But anyway, I got out to the fighter base, slept in a tent, and they never had it very good. That 9th Air Force had a rough life out there. And the CO wanted to give me his pants. He had just washed up in gasoline, and I said, nope, got everything I want. Just, can you find me a way to get back to England? So he radioed up to Brussels and had a Jeep driver come down after me. And so I stayed overnight, and he got down there that night, and he said we'll take off first thing in the morning. So I was there about 2 or 3 nights, and foggier than the dickens that morning, and could hardly find the fuel dump to get gassed up. We took off, and then it turned to rain and sleet. And before we got to Brussels, we had an inch of ice on the windshield, just an open Jeep with a top on. So so we spent all our time looking around the side, seeing where to go. And on the way I saw tanks and soldiers walking behind those tanks, and bombed out trucks and stuff, and I saw the civilians raiding garbage dumps for something to eat. I found out how bad it was on the ground also, and that was no picnic. And I got up to Brussels that night, late, and I was there about 2 nights, and then I found, got a ride back on an English transport to an English air base. Stayed in their hospital overnight, and then they radioed over to my air base. They sent a truck over after me. And so I went out, bailed out January 2nd. January 30th, I walked into my old squadron site. Nobody knew where I was, and in the meantime, while in the hospital, I'd sent a V-mail back to the folks, just telling them I'm okay. That's about all I said. And they got that telegram, or they got my letter, V-mail letter, 1 day before they got a telegram that I was missing in action. Oh. So that was pretty fortunate too. So I got back, and my crew, the rest of them, had found their way back, been off to a rest home for a week, and had just got back, ready to fly. Flight surgeon visited with me and said, "I'll send you a rest home." I said, "No, they're ready to fly. I'm going to fly. I'm not going to get behind them." So February 3rd, I was on my way to Berlin on my 10th mission. And I flew 19 more missions. And they always said 13, 14 missions, about all any crew could hope to get through. And 15th or 16th mission, I got to the point, so enough happened that I didn't think I'd ever get through another one. I really went out without expecting to come back. But we had a lot of other close calls. In fact, on the mission to Kiel, we flew all the way over the North Sea, then it cut across just south of Denmark, and Kiel was right on the other side, north of Germany, a shipbuilding factory. And flying right wing off low section lead again. And I knew the low element lead was having trouble keeping up, and he was getting a lot of chewing out from the CO. And I heard him say, just after the briefing, just before we went to suit up, to another pilot, "I think I got it figured out how I can handle this. If I overshoot, of course, when one airplane noses down to gain a little speed, the other one has to nose down, and if he's already got too much, he's going to get more, and he's going to overshoot. What you should do is S out and get outside and come back in to kind of lose a little time." But he said, and of course, they didn't want you to drag back if you couldn't keep up. They wanted you up ahead, but down below the lead plane. Maybe not up as high as should be, but ahead. So he said, if I overshoot and I lose track of him, we had glass or windshield above to about here. If I lose track, can't see him, I'll look at the airplane, lead airplane, fly off of him until he comes out again. When we were flying over the North Sea, I was flying right off low section lead. All of a sudden I noticed, and he was nosing down a little to get up under the lead plane, and the lead plane was up here. And I noticed the low section lead come shooting, come gaining on him, and I knew exactly when he lost track of him. He looked at that lead airplane, pulled up, his rudder went right into the bomb bay of the plane I was flying off of. And right away I started banking away. and I just saw in the corner of my eye the front end of that low section lead come up over, and the one I was flying off of went right through him. They both went down in the North Sea. I looked back, low section lead had one right engine hanging, gone, and he flew for a few seconds and then he went in spin. They never recovered any of them. And my top turret gunner was on that plane, the original top turret gunner. That's the only member we lost in our crew, original crew. So we flew the low section lead from then on. The right, or the left wingman, I found out later, made a 360. Took him so long he lost track of the formation, so he went on home. And we just pulled off the side and then came back in. But we had a lot of those instances. It's a wonder we didn't have more mid-air collisions and planes lost.
But you say that was the only member of your original crew that was lost.
Yes.
So everybody survived the bailout.
Everyone survived, yeah. And on several missions, the weather got to be so bad in the winter. We flew one mission, we had to get up over 29,000 feet to keep above the contrails. And last time over Berlin, went over Berlin twice. The last time was over the Berlin toward the end of the division line, probably an hour before bombers had gone over. And we, on mission to Berlin, we always carried a demolition bomb in the bottom of the bomb bay, and all the rest were fire bombs. 500-pound clusters of thermite bombs. And at about 2,000 or 3,000 feet, those clusters would break and all the thermite bombs would scatter, and they would ignite on impact.
Start fires.
And start fires. And that's, the smoke was clear above us at our altitude by the time we went over that second time, about an hour later. So there must have been some massive fires. It doesn't make you feel good. I mean, it doesn't make you feel good to drop bombs anywhere. And one mission, we had one toward the end of the war, just trying to tie up transportation everywhere. And we were to hit a small village, and I saw another group was hitting another small village off to the right. And I kind of, the other pilot was flying, I kind of kept my eye on him ever so often. All of a sudden I saw the bombs start to drop. So I followed them down, and they started right at the edge of that village, and they exploded right on across, just like pulling a blanket over it. Nothing but smoke afterwards. Kind of makes you sick to your stomach. And but
were a lot of your targets civilian targets?
Most all of them were military targets, like oil refineries, airfields, rail yards, submarine depends. But toward the end of the war, we did have a couple just to tie up transportation everywhere, crossroads. And Berlin was probably indiscriminate. And that's, you feel worst about it, because just last week I was on this tour to England, and we had a German couple who is now a medical doctor in the United States, but he was in the German army, and his wife told me she was in Berlin, and she said, you can't imagine the fires we had in Berlin. I never told her I was one of them that helped bomb Berlin. But weather became a factor, probably as hazardous as flak or fighters, because we'd come back to our base, and it'd be socked in, where you'd have to peel off from the formation over this beacon, or the buncher we call it. Then you'd take up a heading and let down so many feet on this heading, and that's supposed to bring you over the air base, your airfield. We'd sometimes get abound just above the trees before we'd even see the ground. And all these 36 planes coming back one after another, and other groups the same way, 8-10 miles apart. It's a wonder we didn't have more air collisions, because all the crew was on the lookout. If they'd see a plane come over here, you'd either go over or under. And if we, the airfield would shoot up their own color flare in the middle of the runway, and then red flares at the end. So that's about all we'd catch sight of. We'd see the flares, so then we'd start a turn, hoping we'd come in on the end of the runway. If it was anywhere close lined up, we'd land. So that became a common thing, and actually flying the airplane became secondary. Keeping things running like they should was the main.
So you did complete 35 missions?
I had 28 combat missions. And the last mission was canceled because Patton had overrun the target already. And Patton could have taken Berlin, and should have, but they had agreed that Russia could invade Berlin. So they cut off Patton's fuel, and that's what stopped him. And so they stopped us too. So when the war ended, I did get on a 1-week rest home right at the end, and when I came back, that's when the mission was canceled. Otherwise, I'd have probably had them in. But after the war ended, April or May that spring, and then there was a pocket in Holland that we bypassed. There was no what I want to say, port. There was no port there of value, so they just went around them. Still held by Germans. And the Queen of Holland was in London. She went to Prime Minister Churchill, said if you don't get food to our people there, there's no need to even liberate them, because they were starving by the thousands every day. So we loaded up all the B-17s and B-24s. And
okay, where were we? Talking about the end of the war, and actually, I'd like to hear more about your other missions after the one where you bailed out. Did you have a lot of? How frequent was it that fighters would be a problem?
Toward the end of the war, fighters weren't. When I was over there, weren't quite as much a problem. They came up in 70 to 80. The beginning of the war, and probably 12, 16 toward the end of the war, and then banned in groups.
70 or 80 at a time?
Yeah. And we maybe have 15, 16, but they might go down the division line, hit one group, and go on, come up on another. And actually, the latter part of 44 and early 45, we had the P-51s with wing tanks, and they went all the way to the target with us. So when we had fighter escort, we weren't bothered as much by fighters. I think there was only one time that fighters came through and hit, didn't take any planes out. But when I was over there, mostly flak. But 2 years, the first 2 years, the 8th Air Force was over there. They only had fighter escort over the channel, then they had to leave.
Range of the fighters?
The range. They didn't have the fuel, they had to go back. And we didn't have any place they could land on the continent. They had to go back to England. So the fighters were a terrible threat. And any airplane that got hit or lagged behind was a sitting duck for a fighter and usually got taken out. But we had no pressurized cabins. And when you're up at 28,000 feet, you can't blow your nose, you can't cough. It's that the air is that thin. You breathe normally because pressure is equal inside your lungs and out. But our oxygen mask you had to have on continuously above 10,000 feet. And every so often they'd reach over and give us a shot of pure oxygen just to make sure everything was working right. And so everything was covered except your eyes. That's all. And you had goggles if you want to wear those, but they'd fog over, so I never wore them. But it was cold. Normally, temperature will drop 2 degrees centigrade every 1,000 feet you go up, on the average. So we were up there where it's probably a lot of times 50 below zero Fahrenheit, and everything freezes instantly. I can guarantee you that. And we'd have a scarf wrapped around us, plugging up the holes, and on the way back, I'd look down and the moisture from your breath would be all ice in front of you. And you're sitting there for 9 hours, 9.5 sometimes, never out of your seat. You're freezing. A lot of them get frostbite. We carried an extra oxygen mask and extra gloves or slippers in case some of them burnt out, but that was it. And a lot of our ball turret gunners got frostbite, tail turret gunners, because they couldn't move. They couldn't move a bit. And so it was different than flying nowadays in an airline. When we was first over there, we shut the air coming in the airplane off, thought, well, it'll be a little warmer. Well, just like driving in a car in the wintertime, things start fogging over. And pretty soon you got frost on the windscreen. And so one mission, he was scraping frost, and then while he was flying, I'd be scraping frost so I could have a little square hole about 3 inches square probably. And by the time I could get that much off, his was fogged over, so I'd start flying and he'd start scraping. Well, we had soon learned you leave that cold air coming through to keep things clear. And those are things you learn over there, you don't in the States. And the other thing, we'd have a lot of runaway props. That oil out in the dome would freeze up. And so we would change off flying every 15 minutes. He'd fly 15 minutes, I'd fly 15 minutes. And before we would change, before I'd start flying, you'd change the oil in each prop just a little, one at a time, not enough to bother him flying formation, just a little bit, and then back down, so you get some warmer oil out in that dome, one after the other. When you had that done, then you'd bump him and you'd start flying, and he'd rest his eyes. And
so these are things you kind of learned on the job.
Yes, that's right. And there's only one time I got vertigo. Vertigo is when you kind of lose track where you are. You don't know you're up or down, upside down or what. These contrails are continually, the prop is spinning this way. Prop is spinning this way. And the contrails are super cool air that condenses when it's stirred up. And so your contrails are swirling like this right behind the prop. And all of a sudden, the contrail stopped and I was going around it. and I was fighting myself. I thought I was sitting clear up here looking down at it, and I was trying to turn into it, and I'd pull back, and I finally bumped the pilot. He took it right away, and I looked away. I just could not get rid of that feeling, because the contrail stopped and I was going. And the minute I got my eyes off and looked at something else, checked the instruments, so on, I was okay. But it's the only time it ever hit me. But those things hit you all of a sudden. And so it's learning, and our crew got to work together. Our crew became closer than brothers. And there wasn't anything one wouldn't have done for the other.
Have you kept in touch since the war?
I did for the first few years, then kind of lost track of them. And the only two left now. I know the pilot died 10 years ago. The radio operator died about 4 years ago. Tail gunner died early on. I don't know why, what from, but the only one left is my ball turret gunner and navigator. Navigator lives in California and ball turret gunner in New Jersey.
You ever go to like reunions of your bomb group?
We have a reunion of the 35th Bomb Group every 2 years now, in different parts of the country. And last year I was down in Savannah, Georgia. And next year I think it'll be in Houston, Texas, or 2 years from now in Houston, Texas. And we have about 350, more or less, come. And you kind of stay in touch. My navigator has been to 2 of them most recently, but missed this last year because his wife was ill. Right at the end of the war, I got checked out as first pilot, and I was the last month or so, and I got a new crew, and I flew these food missions. We loaded the bomb bays up with food, all we could get in it, and then we flew across and dropped it on the airfield at Amsterdam and different airfields. And I had my new crew then, and the first mission we had was one of these food missions. And we flew singly, not in formation. So it was going this way, and I see all the others were going off to the right. So I radioed down the navigator and said, "Check your heading. I don't think you're right." So he checked, "Yeah, I'm right. It's right. Just keep on the heading." So, okay. So I flew across the channel, and right away I knew what he did. He took me right into the airfield, the target. And you're supposed to come down an IP initial point. You always come down there, and then you fly a certain path. So I didn't even say anything. I just banked right and flew down the coast a few miles till I could get in between 2 airplanes. I come in and got in line. We flew down probably 20, 25 feet above the field, put the wheels and flaps down, flew down just above stall speed, slow as you could, and then over the runway you dumped everything out. And I hollered at the engineer, the new crew, "Everything clear in the bomb bay." Nothing happened. Didn't hear nothing. I glanced around there. He was gawking out the window, looking. So I hollered at him, not too pleasant like. Said, "Everything clear?" "I don't know." "Well, get your hind end back there and check." So I was pretty peeved by that time, and I wasn't. You could hear me over the roar of the engine pretty clear. And so he crawled back in there, kicked a couple out. Well, he looked back and said a couple hung up. So he crawled back in there and kicked them out. And then he came back up and said, "They're all out now." So I got the bomb bays up and got the power on and wheels up. And the Germans had agreed if we flew a certain route or path, they wouldn't fire on us because we were just above the ground. We could take rifle fire. And if we got off the path, they'd shoot up some red flares before they'd shoot. Well, about right away, red flares all come up in front of us. So I banked away and more red flares, and so I knew the channel was off. I just took a 90-degree turn and headed for the channel and no more flares.
Now this was before the end of the war.
This is right at the end of the war. Just
the Germans had agreed not to fire if they followed a certain path? Why?
Yeah, because this was that portion of Holland that was bypassed, and they were out of food. And they were starving too, I suppose. And so, but our squadron took one of the last shots through the wing on one of those food missions of the war. Well, came back over the channel, come in to make a landing. I got on downwind and I told the co-pilot, read me the checklist. Nothing happened again. And I said, read me the checklist. And looked over and you're just sitting there. I said, read me that blankety blank checklist. And I picked it up and handed it to him. So he started reading it all. We got it set up. The manifold pressure and everything set up for landing. Come around, landed, and I said, come back in, parked on the hard stand. I said, what in the heck was the matter with you? I'd never done it before. I'd never read a checklist before. And that's how poorly trained they were, see. And the navigator wasn't all that sharp to start with, so I said, well, we're going up and fly. So we go up and fly around England for hours just to get acquainted, to get some practice. And he got to be a pretty good navigator. In fact, their pilot was taken off the crew, and that's why I got the crew, because they weren't getting along. And it had to be a pretty poor pilot if he didn't teach his co-pilot to even use a checklist. I suppose he just did things himself, and the wonder that he didn't kill himself and the whole crew.
Yeah.
But anyway,
dangerous situation.
Anyway, we about along in mid-June. Of course, the war was over, and a few of the old crew stayed over to make some look at the damage over in the continent and so on, but most of them geared up to fly back because we all were going to the Pacific. We weren't through, we were in for the duration of the war. Didn't need us over there, they needed us in the Pacific. So we packed everything up, and we took off from our base about the middle of June, I forget just what day, and flew to Wales. Well, we didn't just take our crew, we took about 20 others with us. We just loaded the plane clear full to get the personnel back. And landed in Wales, Valley Field again, and then flew from Wales to Iceland to Labrador to Bradley Field, Connecticut, and about 26 hours flying time. And when I got back to Bradley Field, then took me a train back to Jefferson Barracks. Then I got a 30-day leave, first leave I had in 3 years. Went home, got married during that 30 days, then I went back to Jefferson Barracks and sent out to Lincoln, Nebraska, or not Lincoln, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, to a replacement depot. And there we were kind of geared up to go Pacific, and I was on orders to go to B-29 transition, to fly B-29s. And about the next day or two, the bomb was dropped, the atomic bomb was dropped in Hiroshima and then Nagasaki the next day. So then the war ended. They didn't need us.
What do you think about using the atomic bomb?
A lot of people think it was wrong, but I think it was right. I've talked to infantry people that were in the Pacific. They were being trained to invade Japan. And we were going to be trained on B-29s. We were going to be bombing Japan. It was, invasion was set up for November that year, that fall of '45. And history says Japanese don't surrender. And there were a lot of people killed in those two atomic bomb blasts, but only a fraction of would have been lost on both sides, Japanese and Americans, if we'd invaded Japan. It's my opinion, and a lot of others agree with me. So I think President Truman made the right decision. It ended it right then. And fortunately, it's never been used again. But the invasion of Japan wouldn't have been fun. It would have been disastrous.
And very, very bloody. We've got about 5 minutes of tape left. At the beginning, you made some comments about how movies about war differ. Could you kind of go over that again?
Well, particularly airplane movies. Memphis Belle's a good one to talk about, because if you've seen it, it makes you kind of sick to look at it if you know how it really is. Because they're up there at altitude, arguing with each other, no oxygen masks on, everything going wrong. Crews don't work that way. In the first place, you don't go without your oxygen mask but a few seconds and you're out. So, and then you hear all those shells going off outside. You don't hear them. You got more noise going inside than you can't even hear yourself unless you get over next to the pilot and yell in his ear. So you use intercom. So it's all glorified. And there's nothing happy or good or glorious about war. It's all dirty stuff. And I don't know how to explain it.
You also mentioned at the beginning about one of the reasons you go around to schools and give these talks about your experiences is because you want people to understand more about war. Tell me about that again.
These kids see all these movies like Rambo, all this, and they think it's great. And nobody gets hurt. Nobody gets killed except the bad guys. Everybody has a chance of getting killed, and sometimes it's easier to die than live. It's that bad. And the thing you want to get across, it's not like that. It's worse than you can imagine. Combat is killing, and that first shot at an aircraft I saw changed my feeling. We're there to do damage, to kill. They're going to kill us before we can kill them. That's war. And that's the facts. And there's nothing glorious about taking another person's life. Whether you see it or not.
Very true.
Yeah. These kids are going to grow up, and they will be our leaders someday, and they need to have a frame of mind to avoid war if they can. Any way you can manage peace is better than going to war, because good peace doesn't come out of war anyway. Look at what's happening to Kosovo and the rest of them. Look how much damage. I saw damage in London from all the bombing. I was told last week that one night the Germans came over Coventry and leveled 40 square acres. One night. And it's taken them centuries. They're still building. you don't recover overnight. You lose. Both sides lose. You lose money, you lose lives. I don't know how to explain it. There isn't anything good any way you can think about war. And I'm not saying we shouldn't go to protect the freedom. Freedom in any place you go, freedom is the one thing they treasure the most. And these French people that we had visited and were over here last June, the thing they emphasize is how thankful they are that we gave them help from their German occupation. And that's upmost in their minds. And they'll tell you over and over. And we enjoy our freedom here that other countries don't. And we don't realize it unless you're over there. Freedom to do anything. We have unlimited source or of a way we want to live. We can do as much as we want to. There's nothing that will stop us if we want to work for it. That isn't true in other countries.
So you did feel that the Europeans you talked to did appreciate the efforts of the United States on their behalf?
Yeah, I was back in England in 1976. Our 385th Bomb Group went back on a reunion to our air base. The TV people followed us around, and I was really surprised. I thought they got rid of the Americans and never want to see them come back. They followed us around, and they have Friends of the 8th that are a new museum just opened 2 years ago at Duxford over there. And they're putting all this stuff, history in there, just for the Americans, let alone themselves. And last April, we had a 385 Bomb Group reunion. We had a man from Luxembourg. They just dedicated a memorial in Luxembourg last September, a year ago, for the American flyers that were killed in a situation over there.